Okay, I'm just watching the time, and so it's a couple of minutes after 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. So I think I'll get the webinar started. First of all, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for signing up and attending our webinar on how to future-proof your retail business. We're very excited to talk about what we think are some of the most compelling things and most compelling must-dos that still need to be done in 2022. But let me introduce myself first. I'm Cindy Brown, the Chief Performance Officer of Merge. And at Merge, we are a large marketing and technology agency, and our whole purpose is to promote health, wealth, and happiness to the world by merging storytelling and technology. And as a marketing and technology agency, we really focus on helping you build your strategy for marketing. We have a large creative services arm. We do experience engineering, performance marketing, full set of media services from traditional to all the digital. And then we have a large technology group. And our technology team does both the experience engineering, the customer experience piece of it, but also we have a platform organization. The marketing technology stack is very robust, and we specialize with certain parts of that marketing technology stack to help our clients implement and then do the ongoing maintenance of those technologies. But for this session, this exciting topic that we're going to talk about, it was all driven from the top 22 things you should do in 2022. And so we have an ebook, and you'll get a link to the ebook after the webinar that you can download and see the full set of 22 items. But what I did was focus on what I thought were really dominant ones that we wanted to talk about. And so I'm going to introduce you to our panel. We've got an excellent panel, but we actually had themes around all 22 items. And so we talked about evolving quickly, and what does that mean to evolve quickly and use automation and the technology stack. We talk about being personal but private, and how do you balance that out with personalization and being private. We talk about getting smarter, and that is understanding the whole measurement of this. Now that we have all of this technology and we're using it, how are we measuring what our success is against the KPIs and goals that we set? And then we're going to end up on our fifth topic, which is generate happiness and joy. And what I like to say about retail is that retail therapy is real, and that we need to make sure that we're bringing happiness to this whole equation as we talk to the consumers. The panel that we have is fantastic. We're going to be led by Mike Gaudio, who is the head of agency at Google, and he's going to talk about automation and things that Google is providing that we need to look at and do and implement to make our campaigns more effective. We have Frank Salvaggi, who is on my team. He heads up our measurement and data strategy at Merge, and how do you measure all of these and the changes that are happening because of privacy. We have Albert Liu, who is the channel director at Dynamic Yield. And Albert's going to take us to a whole presentation on how you double down on personalization and the impacts that has. And then we're going to end up with happiness and joy. And so Lisa Miller has her own consulting organization, and she is a consumer insights and innovation strategist. And she actually does surveys on a regular basis. And she's going to help us understand what the consumers are thinking as we're going into holiday 2022. So with that, we're going to get started, and we're going to kick it off with you, Mike, to go through ways that we should be evolving faster.
Sounds good. Thank you for the intro, Cindy. So we all know we're living in a world, in the last 2 years have been nothing but a shining example of fast changing consumer habits, and digital marketing is kind of coming into a new era. So if we think about what that evolution has been, if we go to the next slide, please. We've gone from, those of us who started working with TV and out of home, the broadcast era of marketing, to the precision era where we were, day trading and thinking about, 0.001 of a coin or a penny to think about where our bids and our budgets were being placed. So now we're in the predictive era. And so what can we use to be more predictive about the types of consumers we want to reach, the ones that would most benefit our business, and how they're using the different platforms that are available to them to make decisions on their journey. So if we keep going, we want to talk about how you all have the opportunity to become advertisers who are more and more of a multi-moment type advertiser, and understanding that as a business, we're going to be touched in so many different ways by our potential consumers, and how do we activate on that, understand it, and use that to the best potential possible. So this has a direct impact on the business. This all comes from a BCG study that we did along with them about 2 years ago. We know that market share, cost savings, and revenue increase comes from being a multi-moment advertiser, and not just focusing on the first or last touch that someone might have with you. So if we go to the next slide, what are 3 things that we can walk away from this conversation with today? The first is we have to have a virtuous cycle around our first party data. We need to understand where it's coming from, how we're ingesting it, who those people are, what matters to them, and then how we're going to effectively use that for things like creative, targeting, attribution, and bringing some of that happiness and joy to our consumers. Secondly, we need to think about end-to-end measurement. So not just did this person take the end action that we want them to, but did they start in a way that we felt like is going to bring them the best experience with our brand? And what do we do after they took that initial action with us, like a conversion or buying their first product with us? And then the third piece is we need to create these agile performance loops that frankly can't be done in a manual fashion and need automation. And what that means is we really need to learn in real time what's working, and allow our systems and tools and trust that our first party data and measurement is set up correctly to go at that moment, find the consumers that mean the most to us and are going to bring the best value to our business. So if we keep going forward, if we embrace that, we're going to need to use automation in order to do so, right? So it's going to be an essential tool, and automation is a bit of a keyword, or a bit of a buzzword, not a keyword. But something like bidding or automating our creative strategy, those are things that all kind of tie into that broader category that we deem to be automation. If we go to the next slide. Value-based bidding is something that is going to directly help you maximize your ROI and drive competitive advantage. And what value-based bidding is essentially going 2 steps beyond bidding towards a CPA or return on ad spend, and actually being able to cohort your customers into lifetime value, and understand that if this person has 2x the lifetime value of our average, then we would be willing to bid more and win in that auction in order to give them our message and to have the opportunity to capture their business. And conversely, if that person is going to be less valuable to us, doing the same. So how do we drive growth with value-based bidding? We think about tightening the connection between marketing metrics and business priorities. We use privacy-first measurement and relevant first-party data, and then we find our most valuable customers with automation. So if we go to the next slide. There we go. So number 1, so what do we do to tighten that connection? First, we need to agree on the right metrics for business success. And oftentimes as marketers, we think about potentially what are our marketing or campaign level objectives. And it's on us now to go 2, 3, 4 steps higher and think about, from our business objective in our company, how do we tie the actions that we're taking to that ultimate revenue goal, margin goal, profit goal. Then we need to establish a source of truth. We need to bring everyone on board and say, from front to back and back to front, this is how we're going to measure from step 1 all the way to that profit margin that we know helps our business grow. And here's how we're going to go find more consumers who can help us towards that ultimate goal. If we go to the next slide. We're also going to need to use privacy for safe first-party data to do so, right? Nobody knows who your best consumers are more than you. And so we need to use privacy-centric measurement tools like GA4. We need to think about how to measure and adjust the value of conversions, and not just look at every single consumer under the same lens. And we need to leverage the power of first-party data. And that doesn't mean just uploading a list of, hey, here are all of our consumers, but using some of these automated tools to dig in and find out, how are those consumers interacting with us? What other types of platforms or creative or audiences do they fit within? How are they living their digital lives so that we can be presenting a relevant message to them? And as you can see, like, this brings incremental revenue from the study that we ran to you as a business by leveraging the data that you have available to you around your consumers. If we go to the next set of slides, please. So we want to find our most valuable customers, and in a world where they might be on 6, 7, 8, 20 different platforms on a given day, multiple times on each of those platforms in a given day, we need to use automation, and we need to trust all of the inputs from our measurement and our goals and our first-party data that we're putting into the system, and allow our bidding strategies to go out and find those valuable customers to us. So moving away from kind of like the manual bidding, long past the days of cost per click, but more into the, hey, this is a consumer that fits within our 2x lifetime value, and we're going to pay X for it. And then looking at it as a blended return and thinking through across our different platforms, across our different strategies, are we still profitable overall based on all these different factors? And so if we go to the next slide, please. Just to kind of recap what we need to do moving forward: tighten the connection between marketing metrics and business priorities. So establish those goals, establish a source of truth, and bring everyone on board. And number 2, we need to think about use privacy first measurement and relevant first party data. You should really be thinking about implementing GA4 sooner rather than later if you haven't. For those on the call who don't know this, July was kind of the start date of the ticking clock towards when you will not be able to look back on year-over-year data when we go live with GA4 in 2023. All of our future solutions and product are going to be implemented in GA4, and it has some really cool capabilities right now, like churn analysis, cohorting, propensity to buy analysis, things that use our machine learning to help you get better insights for your business. And then the last one that we want to think about is find your most valuable customers with automation. Use these best practices, test, learn, and scale, develop a culture of experimentation, and know that the more we automate, the more we're going to be able to find customers that help us drive success as a business. And I believe that is it for me, and I'll be passing it on to Albert next.
Cool. Thanks, Mike. All right. So my section, be personal and private. These two things, you might find them to be a little bit contradictory, right? How can you be personal, but how can you also be private, right? How can you be personal if you don't know enough about your subject and, give them relevant content or recommendations, but also not know enough about them that it's creepy, right? So today, what I'm going to do is first tell you a little bit about DY. We're going to talk about personalization concepts, and then I'm going to walk you through a real world example that we're powering today. So first, about us, just to show that we're legit and we do know what we're talking about. This is Gartner's Magic Quadrant for personalization engines. You can see on the top right, we are a leader in this space, and we have been for 5 years. So you might see some other technologies that you recognize, but we won't dive into that today. This is just to show that we have credibility. Next slide, please. So let's talk about personalization, right? So you see some probably familiar faces on the left there. A lot of companies today spend a lot of resources and time and effort into building personalization programs. The difference is that a lot of them are solving very different problems, right? Netflix is tracking a lot of data on its users because it's trying to increase the amount of consumption people do on Netflix because they are a content platform, and that's what drives their stock prices up. Whereas Amazon is very different, right? Amazon is trying to sell you a bunch of products because they have such an expansive catalog of products that it is very difficult for people to, decide what they want to buy. So using very different data points, they're solving for very different, problems, but the KPIs or the end results that they're driving generally kind of fall into the same buckets, right? So you can kind of see on the right, you're trying to find either higher customer lifetime values, you're trying to increase your engagement, you're trying to drive higher customer loyalty, right? And maybe all of the above. But with higher loyalty comes greater sort of demand and expectations from customers that you know what they want to some extent, and that you understand them as a customer, and you're going to show them stuff that is relevant, right? Next slide. So at Dynamic Yield, our philosophy is 2 things. One, you need the right technology, obviously, right? So we feel like we have best in breed technology here. So that's where we play there. And then on the other side of that, you also need the right methodology. And what we mean by methodology is like you need to have obviously, some of the concepts that Mike had mentioned. Organizationally, you need buy-in from a lot of folks. You also then need expertise, experience, resources, etc. Dynamic Yield offers a pretty expansive network of solutions partners like Merge, as well as we have some customer success that will support our customers to kind of blend these two things together, right? Next slide, please. Quickly, McKinsey did a study in 2021 and looked at, the maturity of a lot of brands and what type of personalization they're doing. So they found that people who are doing foundational personalization, that's generally sort of like simple stuff like personalized emails, maybe some product recommendations, drove around 5 to 10% incremental revenue. And then when you get to accelerated personalization, that's probably some segmentation where you're doing maybe like new versus returning visitors, maybe some loyalty tiers, things to this effect, drove around 10 to 20%. But then when you get really into the transformational personalization piece, that's where you're driving curated experience on a one-to-one level in real time for all of your users. That's tying in, all these sort of different elements with very granular audience and segmentation. You can drive up to 25% additional incremental revenue. May not sound like a lot on paper, but it depends on the size of your company and how much revenue you're doing and things of that nature. So real quickly, a little bit about dynamic yield so you all understand what we do, because just saying we do personalization is probably pretty broad. Here are some kind of key highlights or capabilities that we have. Audience management is one thing. So if you don't have a CDP today or anything that's driving your audiencing, dynamic yield can build those inside of our platform. So you can create very specific targeted audiences. We have testing and optimization at our core. So everything we do, we believe should be tested. So A/B testing, you can A/B test anything. Web and API personalization. So if you're using a traditional website and you're some sort of e-commerce business, we can do all of this stuff on your website, as well as if you've got a mobile app or any other sort of smart device, we can push API personalization via API calls. And underneath that umbrella are personalized, content, dynamic content. So if it's like pieces of information, blogs, etc., product recommendation, social proof, real-time messaging, which then leads to sort of like the email personalization, which is a new feature that we've launched recently. We can do personalized product recommendations inside the email, as well as dynamic content on open. And then lastly, triggered messages, right? So if you want to send an SMS at some point because somebody took some sort of action, or if you want to send an abandoned cart email, we can trigger those things inside of dynamic yield. So hopefully that gives you an idea of like sort of our capabilities and the channels that we can do. And you can hopefully see it's like omni-channel. So a couple more points, like companies that we've worked with, we see generally drive up to 40% more revenue from the personalization efforts when done right. Thoughtful personalization and dynamic customer experiences. So this is where it really depends on what you're trying to solve for, right? It can reduce churn, it can strengthen your loyalty, it can increase retention. A lot of brands are spending a lot of time, effort, resources on, paid ads and these other things, but where sometimes it falls down is they don't look at the site experience from paid ad or from the channel that they're coming in. So with dynamic yield, you can personalize all of those different experiences. So somebody coming in from a Google search should have a very different experience than somebody coming in from a Google paid ad, as an example. And lastly, the theme, personalization and privacy, right? So dynamic yield is built in a way where we actually store no data. So we don't know you or anything about you, like your address, where you live, what your name is, what your email address is. We store none of this data. So we are GDPR compliant, CCPA compliant. Obviously, we can do all the opt-in, opt-outs for data. We personalize with first-party cookies. So there's no, third-party cookie sort of issues going on. We also do have API or composable capability. So you can render inside the browser via API, where it lowers the risk of any sort of data compromise, et cetera. If somebody were to hack us today and take all our info, one, it's all encrypted. Two, there's nothing usable because nobody knows who anyone is. We anonymize all of our data. So me, Albert, going to a site, I'm not Albert, I'm maybe user XYZ123. And that's how we kind of anonymize everything and protect our users from any sort of data breaches. Next slide. All right, so now let's just look at a real world example and kind of put all this together. So hopefully it makes more sense. McDonald's is somebody that we know very well. If you don't know, we were actually owned by McDonald's very recently. We just got acquired actually by MasterCard. So you'll see that MasterCard logo in the bottom right. But McDonald's is actually a great example of a use case in real world, real-time personalization. Now, you may think, what is McDonald's doing in technology, which is a great question. So what we did was we were piloting with McDonald's. They were trying to figure out, and the problem they were trying to solve for was two things. One, how do they be more efficient in the drive-through? And two, how do they increase basket sizes in the drive-through, right? So if you put that into, you put that into exponentially how many McDonald's there are across the world, and if they can increase, the effectiveness, et cetera, then you can see like this scales quite a bit for McDonald's. So what we do today is a car drives through, we look at the license plate, we anonymize that user, and we assign them a username, and then we can track all the purchases associated with that person and then personalize the digital menu boards for that particular person based on their taste. So obviously McDonald's, we did really well. They acquired us. Now we're powering 15,000 restaurants across the nation or across the world. And so I'm going to walk you through an experience right now, like that's simulated, obviously, but here's where you can do this without knowing who that person is as well, right? We're talking about privacy. So I drive up to the drive-through. They don't know who I am. It's the first time I've gone to McDonald's. You can see here it's pretty much default experience. You hit the next slide. Let's pretend now I wanted a Big Mac. So I've added a Big Mac, and you can see in real time now we're showing them things that might be complementary to what I'm ordering, right? So you see now chicken McNuggets and maybe a muffin. Next slide, please. Let's say I add my chicken McNuggets because I need more food for me. And then you can see here now it's starting to ask if I want desserts, right? Apple pie or cookies. Next slide, please. And so I added an apple pie, and now maybe I want a coffee or potentially an ice cream to go with my apple pie. I heard this is a thing. You can eat your apple pie with, McFlurry, and it's amazing. I have yet to try it, but I will. And then maybe now I want coffee, so on and so forth. So you can see in real-time dynamic yield, even though I don't know who I am when I'm pulling up to this drive-through, I can then personalize the experience based on just the behaviors that person is taking. And to now wrap that concept into maybe your business, right? You can apply the same thing, whereas you maybe don't need to know everything about all your customers, but if you can identify the problem you're trying to solve, then you can work backwards from that and then develop the personalization program that you need to get those people in the relevant experiences in those moments without knowing everything about them. Cool. And that's it for me. I think from here, I will pass it on to Frank.
Thanks, Albert. I, for one, can attest to how good the McFlurry and the apple pie go together. Hi, everyone. I'm Frank Salvaggi. I'll be walking you through some of the importance of data and analytics just very briefly today. So as Albert was briefly discussing, today, MarTech, AdTech, and compliant identity frameworks have converged and created an ecosystem that allows us to assess media and marketing's efficacy on business outcomes, right? Things that drive your business, sales, churn, retention, lifetime value, in a way that marketers, particularly retailers and CPG brands, have dreamed of for decades. CDPs and platforms and intelligent data design strategies not only allow us to assess business performance, but also isolate the variables, some of which you see on the slide here, that are required to optimize consumer journeys and consumer media strategies. So for the first time, we can isolate the key families of attributes in an audience-first, people-based marketing sort of environment where true value or opportunity exists for media. This helps to get us to those transformational personalization stages that Albert was discussing, where you can truly reap the reward of the investment that you and your brands are making into personalization strategies. In order to do all that, a strategic KPI framework ought to be crafted in order to optimize that. This slide here basically shows you the evolution that a strategic partner like Measur kind of guides brands through, beginning with their sort of zero-party data strategy, where we look to sort of create, isolate, and refine their data collection strategies in order to take them from more or less dependent on the partners and platforms that they're using to deploy their media to where they're sort of self-sufficient, utilizing first-party data, making optimization on the fly given the data that they're collecting, they're housing, and they're harnessing internally. You can probably move to the next slide. There are really three key points that I want to touch on as it pertains to measurement strategy conversations. The first is where we measure KPIs given where we are in our data evolution and how that is affecting the consumer journey. So at Merge in particular, we like to think of things as in terms of living, looking, and buying, sort of a evolved funnel-based approach where we trigger or we establish specific KPIs at each of the consumer journey bases. And within each of those levels, we're looking to optimize based on different targets. And again, given the overall business objective or business imperative that is looking to be optimized against, we establish different benchmarks according to that. So again, the first is where we measure. The next slide shows how often we measure. And the long answer short here is that we are always measuring. A brand culture that truly establishes data as strategy will thrive in a pervasive media landscape where personalization is not only expected, but rewarded in the consumer mindset. So said, there are three general stages of measurement. The first is really pre-campaign, truly extracting your baselines, understanding what your status quo is, what you're looking to improve upon given today's level of investment. The second is sort of mid-flight or during media investment and how you can tweak things on the fly to better your personalization strategies, better your data strategies in order to begin to sort of tweak and garner more response or more engagement through your consumers. And then finally is sort of a post-mortem, post-campaign assessment of how the overall campaign did, again, at driving towards that core business outcome that we're looking to optimize against. The final element worth touching about is sort of the how. And really in today's marketplace, there are really three dominant methods for how we measure the importance of our campaigns today, and it's really incrementality, marketing mix modeling, and multi-touch attribution. You could probably construct a webinar for each of these, but suffice it to say, incrementality is traditional treatment versus control testing, A/B testing, as sort of Albert was alluding to before, to really see what is the incremental lift in deploying one media strategy or one media stream versus not. The second is a marketing mix modeling approach. That's more of a strategic top-down approach where month over month, quarter over quarter, you're looking at sort of a regression based on your level of spend in specific media channels and how that's driving or impacting the core business objective or business outcome that you're looking to optimize towards. And then finally is sort of the new kid on the block, which is multi-touch attribution. Multi-touch attribution is sort of a bottoms-up level methodology where you're looking to sort of identify the interplay of different media together and how one sort of tactic in display or social or email may impact or may buoy another sort of tactic in flight. So again, we can talk about this for days, but I'm actually going to pass it to Lisa to talk about how we bring joy to our consumers.
Thank you, Frank. And hi, everybody. My name is Lisa Miller, and I'm going to bring us home and ending on a topic very near and dear. It's all about happiness and joy, and I'm going to take you on a journey back to joy. I did want to start back. To be able to look forward, we actually have to look back. I want everybody to think about March of 2020. We were all there, but let's look at, these are words that we had never heard in our lifetime. Words like quarantine, lockdown, shelter in place, deaths, hospitalizations. We were asked to stay home. And what happened was, as we were trying to flatten the curve, we flatlined our communities. And we have been working against that since March of 2020. But think back, it seems like an eternity ago now, but think back of those early days of how you were feeling when you were all of this uncertainty around you. And the language of COVID has really shaped us of who we are today and a lot of why we are in the situations that we are facing today. So next slide, please. So what happened was, I do consumer insights for a living. And what I was thinking about is during those early days, do you guys remember how there was all of this free data out there. Everybody was scrambling to say, how are we going to figure this out? How are consumers going to come back and show back up when the doors finally opened? At the same time of all of the free consumer data out there, the other thing that was happening, businesses, we were all being inundated with things like case counts, lockdowns, and all of that going on. And if you're a multi-unit operator, my goodness, it was so challenging. Every day it was different. Every day you had to figure out, how am I going to run the business? And it was surviving, it was sustaining, and trying to figure out how to grow. And through all of that noise of uncertainty, my hypothesis back in March of 2020 was what I called the journey back to joy, and that the only path forward for the pandemic and the economic recovery was we had to focus on joy, not fear. But how do you do that when there is so much uncertainty around? So I've been doing interviews for the last 2.5 years, 50,000 interviews. And basically, this data has become a leading indicator of the economic recovery. What started as a passion project has turned into something that I could never have imagined. But let's kind of fast forward here. When before I actually talk on this page, what happened when the doors opened back in, call it May, June of 2020, there's a line that I use, and I call it when the theory of reopening collided with reality. Let's think about that. The theory of reality collided, or the theory collided with reality. And what happened was we were so anxious to get back outside. Do you guys remember that? And we were so anxious. It was like, let's go back out. But when the doors opened, many of us were very hesitant to come back through those doors. And we've been working against that. And that psychological, the thinking and all of that really negative language made us scared. And some of us are still scared today. And so where we are, when I look at this page right here, where 60%, and this data that I'm showing you is hot off the press, and 60% of Americans are saying we have to get beyond COVID and begin living our lives. But look at the number on the other page, on the other side of this. 41% say that I am fully back to all of my normal activities. So that may be lower than you might have thought, because there's basically 59% of Americans, there's still all of this pent up demand that's still not unlocked. So that's actually really good news as we lead into the holidays. There is still a lot of opportunity to get people back through your doors this holiday season. So next slide. So let's think about, we all feel it, we see it in our business. So there's definitely, from a consumer viewpoint, there are very big economic pressures. No big surprise here, but I want you to look at the magnitude of the change. So 43% of Americans today are saying that the pandemic has had significant negative impact on my finances. And that is up 8 points since April. And if you think about, when did all of this record inflation start hitting? That was about when it started hitting. Now, this point underneath of it, 44% of Americans are saying that they're living paycheck to paycheck. So there is no margin for error in a lot of people's budgets right now. But what I'm going to show you is, I talk about there's always room for joy, to make a little room for joy. And that's what the data is showing us, is that is going to happen this holiday season. So let's go to the next slide. So one thing that isn't talked about very often right now, if you think about the news that you watch yourself, and every day there has been so much violence, and the violence that we're seeing is actually negatively impacting the economy. And again, we don't really hear much about it. So 43% of Americans today are saying, I'm more fearful to go out in public, not because of the pandemic, but because of bad behavior and rising violence. Do you remember last year? Probably it was summertime, and that's when Q2, people were starting to come back, but we showed up differently as consumers. We lost our social skills. It started with just scuffles. If you remember, you might see people were scuffling at restaurants or airports. And now there's things, customers are throwing hot soup on employees. People are pushing each other down. So consumers are pausing and saying, do I feel safe when I go out? And again, it's fearful, not because of COVID, because of the unintended consequences of all of that negative language of COVID. We really have lost a lot of our social skills. So that's something to remember as we move into the holiday season. So let's go to the next slide. So let's look at what is the holiday outlook for 2022. Next slide. The good news, and this has a wow factor. So I know you've heard a lot of information today, but I wanted you to know this. Holiday joy is in the air. And if you look at those numbers at the bottom of the page, 55% of Americans today are excited and happy about the holidays, even amongst all of those horrible things about inflation and fear of bad behavior, and even just being a little bit uncomfortable still. People are excited about the holidays. Now, I will tell you, is last year, as I mentioned, we've been doing this data since the pandemic started. People thought I was crazy in July of last year. And I had my data, and it basically said, people will come out in droves in holiday back into the stores because they missed it. Retail therapy, there's nothing more like it. Nothing better than shopping for gifts. Yeah, it's stressful, the crowds, of course, but people are looking forward. And look at the gap in this data, 55% versus 44%. So people are more excited than they were last year. We know last year was really good. And again, that's even with all of this inflation and all of these other looming issues. Now, also very important, the other number on this page, 37% of Americans are still anxious and nervous. And I have this line, I talk about lead with joy, reassure with safety. And the reassure with safety today is, yes, it matters to have visible cleaning. It matters that things are organized and they look and feel safe. But also think about your parking lots. Think about, the safety of, the security cameras, the lighting, all of those things. Because of that rising violence, people want to feel safe from a security standpoint, not just safe from COVID. And that number is actually only down 2 points from last year. So we can't forget that a lot of Americans are still a little anxious. All right, so let's go to the next slide. So the other thing, and I want to explain this chart a little bit. So this says at the top, the rediscovery of shopping in stores versus online. Definitely online is not going away. In fact, online last year for holiday was still very, very strong in year-over-year growth. But the indication of this is saying 26% of Americans basically saying buy more gifts online to avoid in-store shopping, 26%. So that's still, reasonably, 1 in 4 people, but it's down 12 points from last year. So what does that mean? So that means people are excited to get back to the stores. So then 10% said that they're going to pick few stores that I trust so I can have safety protocols. And that's down 8% too. So last year, consumers would say, you know what, I have my short list of stores that I'm going to go in and I'm going to find what I need in maybe 3 to 4 stores. Now that idea of kind of taking it all in, going to multiple stores, and that's good for that browsing and really trying to find the right gifts. So again, another data point to say consumers are excited to get back to stores. All right, so the next slide. So this next idea, I want to pause on a little bit. It's called the joy of shopping. And I'm going to challenge each and every one of you to change your paradigm. So stick with me for a minute. So I do a lot of work with all types of companies, retailers, restaurants, even nonprofits and financial institutions. And I always hear leaders talking about, we need to get consumers to come back. And I do air quote, come back. The issue with that is that consumers have been home for so long, they haven't really gotten back to their normal frequency. So we're actually in a frequency game right now to unlock all that pent-up demand. And the way I like to challenge you to think about it is to think about it as retrial. Remind consumers why they fell in love with your brand and your service and what you offer, why they fell in love with your brand in the first place, because we've forgotten. Think about an experience that you had recently, whether it's at a restaurant, whether it was traveling, even just going to the movies. And if you had a good experience, you're like, wow, I kind of forgot. That was really joyful. And so how is that different, or why is that different? If you're thinking about this, thinking about a frequency plan, I'm coming back, versus, let's say, a grand opening plan. If you're doing a grand opening plan, would you think about it differently than just doing a regular kind of marketing to drive frequency? Of course you would, because if you're doing a grand opening plan that's somebody that doesn't really know who you are and what you do, what you say and how you say it is going to be different. So change your paradigm. And when people say we got to get people to come back, say, no, 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 no. We're actually generating retrial. And it's a nuance, but it's massively important when it comes to communication hierarchies. All right, the next slide. So let's look at this. When we think about holiday shopping, as consumers, we've all learned about labor shortages, inventory shortages, all of those things. So 38%, so almost 4 in 10, have already started their shopping, or they plan to in September and October. So that's even earlier. So when it comes to getting your programming, I know the holiday marketing continues to move up and up and up, but because of last year, those last minute shoppers, if you waited too late, your packages, in store, you might not have found what you needed, or if you ordered it online, might not have arrived. So we've learned from last year. So make sure that you don't wait. You want to make sure you've got enough going into the momentum into the holiday to start earlier. All right, so next slide. So I always like to ask people, what do you think is the most important thing to make your customer experience more joyful? So I want you to think about that. So does everybody have something in their head, whether, is it decorations? What is it? Is it the music? Is it special offers? What is it about it? So think about that for a minute. All right, so let me tell you what it is. It's going to be your people this season. And when I have been, the Great Resignation, honestly, it was perfectly predictable. And I don't even like to call it the Great Resignation. It's the Great Reassessment. There are labor challenges. We've heard about quiet quitting. And at the end of the day, consumers are our employees, and they want to feel a sense of belonging. And I know it makes so much common sense, and it's like, yeah, we already know this, but are your employees having a good experience? And is it worth it? Is it joyful for them? What can you do instead of just focusing on making your customer experience joyful? How can you make your employee experience joyful? And that's hard, I get it. But those that do figure it out are going to have even greater success than those that don't. I'm going to tell you one quick story. And again, I'm sure all of you have heard many of these. And I'd love to hear other stories if you guys want to share some with me. So a restaurant, a national restaurant chain was telling me the story. A manager came in to open, working with the store. Their entire kitchen staff came together, came to the manager and said, we were offered $4 an hour to go across the street to actually earn $4. And these were your back of house cooks and such. That was a lot of money to them. But then the head cook says, you know what, we want to stay, but can you meet us halfway at $2? Because they felt a sense of belonging. They felt a sense that the manager had their back. They wanted more pay, but they weren't going to walk just for $4 more. So how would your employees and your teammates answer that question? Would they just walk for more money? What can you do to encourage a greater sense of belonging to make it worth it? Because right now, the unintended consequences, all this turnover, one of the biggest frustrations that's emerging is customers are really, really irritated with lack of training right now. And it's higher in retail shops than restaurants right now. So taking care of your employees now, leading into holidays, will yield very big dividends. Okay, next slide. So what's the now? I always like to talk about the so what, now what. So what we have to remember, and again, think about your own experiences. The unintended consequences in the physical, mental health are really profound. It's changed us. In fact, about 25% of Americans say that COVID has permanently made them more anxious. So we're going to need to work harder to deliver joy. When it comes to changing the narrative, change it to about retrial, and instead of just going back to previous behaviors. There's a lot of discussion about consumer behaviors changed. Well, sure they did. But what happened is the needs and fundamental of convenience didn't change. How we could access things overnight changed. So it would accelerate it. So the needs fundamentally didn't change. And remind them why they fell in love with your brand in the first place. The most important point on this page is how can you deliver joy to your employees this season? Start now. We know that it is so challenging, the labor market. It's a race to nowhere if you just keep throwing money at people, because they'll just jump to the next thing. We need to create joy, a sense of belonging, to make it worth it, just like we do for our customers. So remember that. And hopefully you guys enjoyed this journey back to joy today. And I'm going to turn it back over to Cindy.
Thank you, Lisa. That was excellent. That was an uplifting way to finish the material. We have time for some questions, and so if you have a question, put it in the chat. But I do have a question for each of the panelists, and as we were going through this. So, Mike, going through what you were saying in terms of using automation, you talked a lot about value-based bidding. And when you're talking about value-based bidding, are you basing that on first calculate what your lifetime value is for your clients and then figure out a bidding strategy of saying, okay, we know what your client, and I'm sure you can segment that into multiple segments of clients, what this type of client is worth. Is that what you mean by value-based bidding?
Absolutely. There's a couple different ways to think about it. You can start relatively simply and say, what are we willing to spend, and what does our return need to be in order to make that a profitable sale? That can be a value. You can get into margin, you can get into gross margin, you can get into profit margin, you can get all the way down to lifetime value for a consumer. And that really allows you to start playing with different bids towards the different types of folks that you segment, but also different products as well, right? So if you think about with Google, especially for retailers, shopping, search tend to be those real profit driving, bottom of the funnel type products. But if you know there's value to bringing someone into the fold and you know what they're going to become as a consumer of yours, then it opens the door to things like Discovery and YouTube and platforms where traditionally you may not see as large of a return, but in reality, it's a fantastic way to reach new consumers and to build your presence with audiences that you didn't even know might be interested in your brand. So long-winded answer, but simple question is yes.
Yes, that's perfect. 'Cause I know we've been doing product gross margin bidding, so if you've got more gross margin on a product, that allows you to, look at your bidding strategy and say, I can afford, this.
Yeah.
But in terms of lifetime value with customers, that That's awesome, because you're right. I mean, they may be introduced to your brand on a YouTube video that they watched, and now I understand with GA4 we're going to be able to see that whole journey much better, and therefore measure it much better.
Yeah.
So
And you can, and at the product level, you can start playing with things like volume versus lifetime value as well. So during the holiday season, you might segment out your lower margin but higher volume products and have a completely different strategy on getting as much volume as possible, and then go after
got it.
that lifetime value type customer for those higher margin products, and really make sure that you're meeting your return threshold there too. So
That was very helpful. Thank you.
yeah, of course.
So Albert, I'm looking at the McDonald's, menu
Yep.
quite a bit, and just for the audience too, as the first selection was the sandwich, right? So pick the Big Mac. Based upon that, are you saying, you personally saying, people who pick a Big Mac, then typically, because I was floored that the next option that you gave was chicken nuggets or I think a muffin. It's
Yep.
like you picked a Big Mac and now muffin is one of the top next ones.
Yeah, I think it depends on regional, there's a lot of nuances to it, right? I think each algorithm is probably learning different because of the behaviors of the people in each like geo or country. Based on like, an example might be in certain areas, this item is bought more with this item versus in other areas it's something else. And so that's kind of where we can take data that we have as a whole or collectively to start making those recommendations based on what we've seen other customers do.
Okay, so it's kind of like basket affinity, for a
Yep.
retailer, right? If I
Yep.
choose this as my first product, here's the most likely second product. Now, is there any personalization based upon the fact that now you have this customer, they've gone through the line and they come back again next week? Do you identify them at all? Or
Yep.
can you
Any
identify
other
them?
McDonald's drive-through they go through, we can identify them using their driver's or their license plate. So if like you went to McDonald's in LA and you bought some things and then you traveled and you drove your car to, I don't know, San Diego, and you went through another McDonald's, we can stitch those together. We now also can stitch together mobile app as well. So if you've got the McDonald's mobile app, we know that, you maybe like chicken nuggets versus fish fillets, and we'll send you relevant offers, et cetera, et cetera. And so, you can see it's kind of omni-channel and it has no web experience per se.
So going back to that, I'm in San Diego, I'm in a different McDonald's, you actually are reading the license plate number.
Correct.
But you're not associating that with an individual, but
Correct.
it's still identifying somehow who this car is.
Correct.
Right?
We just know this number, this sequence of numbers, which then we anonymize into our own user ID, has now, gone to these two locations and has bought these things. So then we can make some, assumptions or at least some recommendations the next time they go through a different drive-through or send them offers on the mobile app.
Well, that's amazing. That's amazing. Thank you.
Yep.
And then Frank, the question that I had in going and watching your presentation, I'm intrigued by the multi-touch attribution, as a way of measurement. I mean, we had incrementality and how you test with incrementality with holdout groups and A/B testing, and then we have the media mix model, which has been around for a long time. I know is getting modernized now that all data, is becoming more available and is kind of stitched together. But multi-touch attribution, how is that impacted with the privacy changes that are coming up?
Yeah, no, that's probably the biggest space where privacy has impacted the measurement space. MTA is, there's some of the leaders in the MTA space is doing a lot of tokenization of not only devices, but of individuals in order to get things at either a personal or a household level that really isn't usable or isn't traceable back to a individual consumer, where you can still glean the insights devised from traditional MTA or what was MTA 5 or 6 years ago, while still maintaining the privacy of the respected consumer. So there's a lot being done there to secure the individuality that exists within MTA, but a lot of the leaders in that space have already taken or undertaken many of those efforts.
So is there an industry standard that's going to come out? Like there's this one accepted tokenization method, or are the different MTA technology vendors kind of all doing their own thing?
And it's really early days. Initially, it seems to be the latter, but there might be an industry sort of convergence on what they think the actual standard should be. But here we are, I think probably 18 months since MTA has begun to fall a little bit. I don't want to say out of grace, but it maybe wasn't where it was 18 months ago. I still think it's early days to see who the eventual leader or leaders are going to end up being. But with groups like a New Star, for instance, sort of spearheading the way, they seem to be most best positioned to really kind of come up with a universally accepted tokenization.
Well, we're interested to see what the future holds with that. And then the last one, ending with joy. Thank you so much, Lisa. I'm pretty excited that 55%, that's a big 11-point lift, are excited about the holiday season. We have a lot of clients that the holiday season is the season. And so that's encouraging to hear that. But I was intrigued by the retrial versus comeback. And retrial is not a term that I would say consumers, would use. Can you help us with some words? How would you say, I've got to get you to retry me without saying
I think
retry?
I think the best way is to think about it as, like I said earlier, falling in love with the brand in the first place, which is inviting them back for those emotional connections. So there's obviously still going to be issues with labor and some assortment. So it's really about the experience. So it's also, I think it's as much what you show in the experience as much as it is what you say. But yeah, you would never want to say the word retry, come back, to say come back is also just going to be kind of, people will glaze over.
Yeah, I left you.
Yeah, I left you. But, you have to motivate people to get off their sofas. And again, think about all of your own behaviors right now. Is your frequency back to where it was pre-pandemic? Maybe you're out and about, but maybe you just don't do it because it's not worth it. So I think the best way to describe it is, how do you make an experience? What are the things that you can really tell your consumers and your customers that makes your experience worth it? Then those are the people that will give you grace on the flaws that, we know sometimes will happen. But it's remind them why they fell in love with the brand.
Excellent. And then we have a question from the chat. How can you track if a brand is over marketing to a customer? Is it as simple as tracking the response rate to multiple touches over time? Frank, I'm going to give you that question. What do you think?
So the question is, I heard it was, what's the best way to assess whether or not you're oversaturating a particular individual, right? So this really, you can use sort of closed loop analyses to identify how specific KPIs are impacting that individual. Here, something like a media mix model or marketing mix model probably isn't, a perfect use case. But the best way to do it is really to understand, given the specific journey of an individual and like journeys, and this is really where the value of an MTA-like solution or a closed loop solution really comes to play, how that impacts specific cohorts of like consumers who have had similar journeys, or how it is impacting consumers who represent similar demographics, and what the optimal sort of media mix is for those individuals. So I would say this is where closed loop analytics really comes to play. And this is where really the importance of KPI, people-based marketing, or audience-first marketing strategies, and why they're so central in today's space.
And that makes sense. Well, we are at our time. I want to thank everybody for joining us. We have your email addresses as you signed up, and we will send you the link to the recording and also to our ebook. Everybody enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Bye-bye.